Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, G1. As always, I hope you are having a good week. I have been busy getting ready for the family and the holiday. However, I have a good show for you this week. I got a chance to interview Paul Avallone, author of the book Tattoo Zoo, and that is what I am giving you today. I want to thank Paul for doing this, and I will post links down into the description for his site, and you can go over there and enjoy his content, read his story, and see his blog and the photos that he has up and everything. Really interesting guy. Very good interview. I'm very happy to do that. Go order his book and give it a read. It is very good. I will say before I give you the interview that at the time I did the interview last week, that I had not finished the book, but now I have completed it. Finished it about a day after I did the interview, and it is well worth the read. It is very good. Anyway, here we go. Thanks. Go ahead and get started if you're okay with that, and if
Okay.
you just
Yeah.
give me a little bit of your background and kind of where you're from and who you are.
Oh God, I hate talking about myself. It's like, it's all on my website. What's my background? What is it? Whatever it says on the book. What was it? Years of special forces, and then ask more specific questions. My background. I'm an old man now. I'm 71. It's like I was born in the Eisenhower. His first year in office.
Right.
So that's going way back then. I'm older than Bill Burford.
Yeah. And that's tough to do. He's an old fella.
Yeah, see.
He's been around a long time. So, is your military background is when were you in? How long was your service?
I went into the Army in '77, and I was actually 25, and I went in for Special Forces for the Green Berets, and made it. And I spent a few years active duty in 7th Group, and I was down in Panama in the heyday of the Panama Canal. In fact, I was there when it was turned over, when we gave it back to the Panamanians, the whole canal. And Central America had been my specialty. Earlier, I dropped out of college in the college years and hitchhiked all over Mexico, Central America, lived like that for a few years, et cetera, until I went into the Army. And so 7th Group was natural for me because of the Spanish and my experience in Central America. Got out of active duty because we weren't doing anything. This was just Nicaragua had just fallen. I don't know if you're familiar with that stuff. It had become communist, and then El Salvador civil war was gearing up there, and we weren't doing anything. It was the Carter years. I got out just before Reagan would win the presidency that year and change everything. And Central America really cooked up, El Salvador, et cetera. And I came back in a couple of years later in the reserves because I didn't want to do it full time. There were a couple of reserve groups. There was the 11th and 12th, and the 12th was on the West Coast, all the way to Chicago and the different things. So I did reserve until the reserves was busted up, and then I was out here in Tennessee, so I went to 20th Group, which is the Green Berets, and out of Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, you name it. I don't even know, Georgia, Texas. And luckily, I got my war, and I was too young for Vietnam, and all the other wars were too quick, right? Panama was so fast, and there was nothing else. So luckily, I got my war at 50 years old, which is Afghanistan, deployed over there in 2002.
Oh, wow.
Afghanistan with the team. And I wrote about it in a bunch of it turned out I had published, the Soldier of Fortune published a bunch of my articles on my team in Afghanistan, and they're all available. I have them up on a website, all in PDFs. Okay. And actually, the articles got me because I didn't run them through the Army channels.
Oh, really?
Do you know how that goes? I mean, they want to see what you're writing, and I knew if I showed them this stuff, come on. It's gonna take 8 or 9 months to go through their editing process, and there'll be nothing but red lines through everything. Who knows? So So that's what Soldier Fortune published the articles, and then Army Magazine, which is Association of the United States Army, published some articles, and then I did some more trips to Afghanistan, embedded and on my own as a journalist there, and wrote more stuff I spent a couple more years in Afghanistan afterwards and did various stuff and wrote to pay my way there.
Right. So you got to see kind of both sides of it then, the civilian side and the active duty
Yes,
side.
in fact, that's what I like. I got to see the military side, and as the SF guy, from 2002 into 2003, when the war had basically been won, but then my team was in eastern Afghanistan in Jalalabad. As I wrote about it, we were hunting drug labs and whatever high-value targets and doing all that, and we had our own army of about 100 Afghan militias that we got from the local warlord. So it was a great Green Beret mission because it was the training and the running a militia, your own militia, which is the original Green Beret mission going way back to Iran in the 50s and Vietnam in the 60s and Central America in the 80s, which is what was happening in Honduras and El Salvador. So it wasn't the door kicking. We weren't the door kickers. SF and like the Navy SEALs was going towards the door kicking mode so much, but it wasn't the door kicking. I was the old guy, the old guerrilla warrior type of thing, where it's really training. It's the principle of the Green Berets, which you were called force multipliers. You take one team and can actually develop a whole company or battalion of the insurgents or the counterinsurgents. That was the idea of the Green Berets, the trainers. We were trainers and teachers first. But then, of course, the glory is in the door kicking, the raids, and which is Bill Perber speaks about it quite a bit in his podcast, that Chasing Ghosts, and he repeats what I have been saying for years, that all the glamour's in the door kicking, but that you can get light infantry can do a really good job doing that, and Rangers are really superior in that. And Marsoff, the Marines, can do it too. Why do you want to take Green Berets who are really teachers and waste them kicking down doors? But that's just my theory.
Sure, yeah.
It's not glorious. It's not glamour. It's not, blowing in the door and going in shooting, whatever.
Right. Yeah, but
does that tell you anything?
Yeah, that's a vital role, though. Is that's the whole aspect of COIN, is you're supposed to be working with those indigenous people and the training up their forces and all that. It seems like that's something that got, like you say, shifted to the back burner. And do you think that contributed a lot to how terrible the ANA was or is?
No. I mean, no, I don't think that contributed to it. SF was still doing that. Still had their teams. The training stuff, and had the militia there, the ones that had it. Even when I was later in the aughts, when I was there as a civilian, and I knew some SF guys and their teams over there. No, the ANA. Who was training the ANA? Most of the training for the ANA went to the National Guard.
Oh, really?
There were guard units doing that. Yeah, and they were guard teams. They were actually. I forgot what they were called, but they were mostly guards. I knew some Oregon guys and Montana guys, and so they were putting in teams to do the ANA training. And SF was doing its own. The SF had their own. I was not in SF anymore, but they had their own Afghan special forces, which were supposed to be pretty good,
Gotcha.
Which they would use. Like we used our own militia. And they were already the good warlords fighters, and they're Afghans, which are really good fighters.
Sure,
really, yeah. I mean, I wrote about that in my articles. It's all there, and the ANA was mostly a sham. I mean, anyone would tell you that at any one time there was a third or a half were actually there. The rest was just money going to the commanders. I mean, the ANA was a sham. So I don't know if I could blame it on our own military training aspect of it. No, I couldn't. The Afghans are different, man. What would they want to fight for? America?
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah.
They fight for their own tribe. So.
Sure. Yeah, that's an old scam that put more guys on the books than are actually there and collect their pay. That goes back a long time.
Yeah, and even the ones when I was embedded a journalist, a freelance journalist over there, and embedded with, like, for example, the 101st, which I wrote articles on too. That when I would be on bases, like cops that would have a company-sized cop, and you'd actually have a complementary company of A&A, which would be maybe a half of a company, and the A&A commanders would always try to get food and everything from the Americans because, their allotment wasn't getting to them. It was up at the money was going to the higher levels, battalion and brigade and the general staff. So, which is it's the corruption of that kind of a government. So.
Yeah. It's a terrible system. Yeah. I feel for the guys down at the low level like that are, struggling, just try to make their eat their rations and do their thing, and then can't even do that, because
you get the little bit of money that they get, but I guess it's better than not being employed anywhere in the country.
Yeah. Living in a cave on the side of the mountain, I guess. Yeah. So that was that really something that kind of influenced you or inspired you to write the book, and
no, not
put that in, or
tattoos,
tell me about that.
Tattoos, all that stuff is in Tattoo Zoo one way or another. Tattoo Zoo was original. I was never a novelist. Mm-hmm. I wrote screenplays in my civilian side. Successful and unsuccessful. Mostly unsuccessful is just the way, nature of the game. Sure. So I wrote for Hollywood. But by the time 9/11 happened, and I went over to Afghanistan, I was no longer wasn't living in L.A. anymore. I wasn't part of that, so I was gone, and etc. Then I came back from the SF deployment to Afghanistan. I knew it had to be. I was going to write something on and so my plan was to write a movie about an A team in Afghanistan, and it was going to. A movie, a screenplay is entirely. A screenplay is it's like a blueprint. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And so I started to write it, and I was doing it too much of my own experience. And a buddy of mine joked, never been in the Army, what are you going to call this thing, Afghani Whammy? And I said, wow, you just hit me, man, Afghani Whammy. And I knew right then it had to be a comedy. So I wrote a comedy, a lowbrow comedy screenplay about the Afghan war. And I couldn't get it to anywhere. Now, Iraq was going on, and Iraq was a failure. No one in Hollywood cared about Afghanistan at all. So my Afghani Whammy died for nothing, just a screenplay. And then I did a lot more embedding and over there in Afghanistan. And by the time I was late 2008, 2009, I'd seen a lot, and I wrote this big, long essay called Flirting with Afghanistan, which was very similar in a sense to Michael Herr's Dispatches from Vietnam, which is a profound book from the Vietnam age. And anyway, I couldn't get anyone nationally, any magazine, to run this big 17,000-word essay on why it's a total fiasco in Afghanistan. This is in 2009. And so from that frustration of not being able to tell that story at all, then I said, it's time to write the real movie of Afghanistan. So I wrote a movie called Tattoo Zoo, which is the heart of the book. There was the screenplay. So to give you an example, a screenplay at the most is 15 to 18,000 words, maybe 20,000. No one likes to read in Hollywood. No one's going to read in Hollywood. They pay people to read for them because they hate to read. Everyone likes watching a movie. I'm talking executives, actors, everyone. Watching is easy. Reading is work. So you can't use many words. But my Tattoo Zoo turned out to be 25,000 words, which was too long, but I had some connections with some powerful producers who I got it to and read it and went, wow, this is 2010. Gosh, no, we love this story. This is fantastic. But there'd been no successful movies at that time from either Iraq or Afghanistan. Lone Survivor hadn't come out, and the American Sniper hadn't come out. So all had been failures except Hurt Locker had come out and won an Academy Award for Best Picture, but it didn't make money and it didn't play overseas at all. And the overseas audience is huge. That's where the money's made in Hollywood now, overseas.
Right.
And so people who the producers got it to some high levels of Hollywood, and everyone loved this short little tattoo zoo. And here's what came back to me. If you turn it into a space movie, we might consider it.
Wow.
I'm glad you're laughing because that's absolutely true.
Wow.
Turn it into outer space and we might consider it. And I just, what could I do? Nothing. And so I sat around for a couple of years and then I said, let me bring it back as a movie by not the screenplay, but let me attempt to write it into a novel. And I said, how can I turn it into a novel, which has to be about 80,000 words, 100,000 at the most, from a 25,000 word screenplay that I already wrote it in 25,000 words? I mean, how can I even write 80,000 words? Well, you're holding in your hands this 250,000 word magnum opus, which, I mean, once I get, it's like Stephen King said, he's said this, he said, when you start a novel, it's like an archaeological dig. You're digging and you're brushing off things and more is appearing and you get into the depth of it. And that's what happened to Tattoo Zoo. With the hope, the original plan of the novel was to introduce it to Hollywood as a novel, and then they would buy the screenplay. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Like I said, I'm about 2/3 of the way through it, and it has been very good stuff. I am a big reader, and I have a pretty good collection of books. I read a lot of military history, a lot of mostly nonfiction, but the fiction I read is pretty, action-packed, that kind of stuff. And it is right up there with some of the best stuff that I've read. So
even though that's a thank you for the compliment. Even though, I mean, action-packed, it doesn't start out with action. In fact, I knew that writing it as a novel. I knew you have to start out with the action scene, and you have to leave your heroes in danger and peril, and then you go back. And I said, no, that's just not the book I'm writing. I'm writing the big Moby Dick sort of book. So I mean,
yeah, it has my idea. This building tension, which I really like. I really like that a lot.
Well, good among the characters, because I've always believed that stories are characters in conflict. I mean, the characters it should be. So, for example, I mean, the inspiration for actually writing Tattoo Zoo was the idea, as the screenplay, was that I couldn't, the big flirting with Afghanistan, this essay that was saying everything that Tattoo Zoo would eventually basically say. In this essay, no one's interested. So turn it into a movie which people can watch the movies. And the inspiration was in fact, I'll mention the movie, maybe you've seen it or not, Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory.
Oh, yes. I'm a huge Kubrick fan. I love his stuff, and yeah, that is a fantastic movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that one, Kubrick could still do a movie under 4 hours.
Yeah.
it's only 93 minutes or something like that. But that was the inspiration, was that the injustice that Paths of Glory showed. Remember, the command sticks it to the three people, to set the example. So that's what I wanted to kind of, that was the inspiration of Tattoo Zoo, the corruption of command, which is really just political, even though they have stars on their collar. They're political. Sure, yeah. The corruption of command, and who eats it is the guys way down below.
Yeah, the everyday soldier, the everyday grunt. Yeah, no, it's I to that point, and that Paths of Glory is like I said, a great film, but it's telling a story from World War I for people who don't know. And it's very real. It's very, very much the way things were back then, and so it's a timeless kind of tale of how life is in that job, right?
Yeah, and in fact, if one reads the screenplay of mine, Tattoo Zoo. In fact, I can't read it anymore because once you've written the novel, you say the novel has so much depth in it compared to a screenplay at 20,000, 25,000 words can't have depth. It can't. Mm-hmm. You're leaving it all to the director and to the actors. Mm-hmm. But I named the main character, who's Major Lieutenant Colonel Dove in the book, But in my tribute to Paths of Glory in the original screenplay, he was a Major Douglas, named after Kirk Douglas,
yeah.
who was. I mean, that was just my little kind of the hint that this is not just my original work. This is inspired by Paths of Glory.
Excellent.
And as I was writing the darn thing, I realized not only had I gotten, by 60,000 words, I knew I was barely started in the story. I go, gosh, and I thought I couldn't even, get 80,000. I would pull off my shelf a book that had been published a year before that, or 2 years before that, Matterhorn. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with Matterhorn? It's the novel of the Vietnam War by Karl Marlantes.
Okay.
And it's a huge book. It was published in like 2010. A huge book of the Vietnam War by Karl Marlantes, and it's an epic sort of a novel. And it's long like Tattoo Zoo. So I would pull it off my shelves and say, well, I guess they published it at Matterhorn. Maybe they will publish this, even though I'm breaking all the rules by being way too long.
Yeah, I don't think it's too long at all. Honestly, you have a long story to tell, and you've got to develop it, and you got to go where the story takes you. Do you when you're creating like that, when you're writing, and I'm assuming you still write to some extent, does it pour out of you like that? Do you have to kind of just sit down and get things out, or how does it work for you?
Yeah, that it worked so. Since Tattoo Zoo was born from a screenplay at 25,000 words, I already had for the novel the skeleton of the story. I had the main characters, I had the arc and the way the story travels. What's going to happen in the village, and they go back, and then mm-hmm. and then they go back to the village, etc. And then the big attacks are going to come, etc. So that was already done. So I didn't have to worry about arcing the story or writing the story or outlining the story. It was there. Then the rest is just, I think I wanted to, a couple of intents with the novel was, the first thing I didn't want is like in Matterhorn, at the beginning they have the platoon lists and all that stuff. And I said, no, I'm not going to do a list of the characters at the beginning and show that. I want to make it clear to the reader so he's not confused. And I'm not going to put a glossary at the end. I don't want a glossary. Right. So many war books have glossaries. And I said, if I can't make the reader recognize what an RPG is and what this is and what that is, then it's my failure as the writer. So those were my two requirements. No list of characters at the beginning and no glossary at the end, and yet still understand it. So I'm hoping you're not confused by the characters, because there are a whole bunch of them. Okay?
Yeah, not at all.
That you could follow the different soldiers, and there are Holloway's different from Finkel, who's different from Nell, who's different from Ketchum, who's different from Sergeant First Class Red Cloud, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of them. And then First Sergeant Kozak. Oh, my. The guys on the helicopter, the Chinook.
Right. Yeah, that's the part that I'm reading right now was the Chinook. So, yeah.
Oh, are you? Wait, so I wondered where you are. So is the Chinook coming up into the valley, or?
Are already there. We'll save the surprise for people who want to read. So, yeah.
Oh, you've read. Every so often I pull the book off the shelf, and I love that whole scene where it goes from the guy and the crew chief in the back to the pilot to the guys on the ground, and we're seeing from all their different points of view. And the glory! It's like ballet watching that Chinook. It's like ballet.
Yeah, having done some flying, that was harrowing. I will say.
Well, what kind of flying do you do? I mean, I don't fly. I've been a passenger all the time.
So I'm in Civil Air Patrol. I'm a captain in Civil Air Patrol. So I'm a right seat in a Cessna 182. And I'm an observer, so we do search and rescue, and go around and do disaster response. So we will take photographs of like hurricane damage and tornado damage and stuff like that. Provide it to FEMA, and it's Air Force Auxiliary, basically, is what Civil Air Patrol is. So.
Okay. Did you ever want to fly rotary wing?
I know a couple of helicopter pilots, and it's such a different animal than fixed wing, and the requirements and everything are so much different. And I don't have my pilot's license, and because it's expensive, and it's even more expensive to get rotary wings. So I don't, it's one of those things that I don't know anybody that has helos. So even if you got your license, maintaining your license is the real cost. So with CAP, that's a lot of our pilots are there to, we're volunteers, so we volunteer our time, but you're there to maintain your requirements, and your qualifications. So not having access to a helo to do that, that would not.
Yeah, you would have had to go the military route to do that.
I'm
police, surrounded here. I'm in Clarksville and Fort Campbell. I'm surrounded by 160th pilots. I mean, the best of the best here. I mean, the guys that make the career. In fact, they just lost a crew this week in the Mediterranean, if you know that.
I did see that story.
Yeah, right.
We have local police and things that have helos, and I've talked to them. We've had some interaction with them. They're little birds and whatnot, and man, those things are pricey to operate, I tell you. So
yeah, that's right.
It's not like the cost of a fixed wing, which is pricey in itself. But anyway.
Okay, so if you're at the Chinook part, you've got the best stuff is coming.
Sure, yeah.
All the best, slowly but surely. Oh.
So how much of the book is from your experience? I mean, obviously it's a story you've put together, but there's so much there. There's so much realism in it. How much of that is your experience, character-wise, or anything?
Actually, nothing's based on me in there at all. I'm not anywhere. In fact, because I'm not. I'm just. I was the observer. In fact, so much of my time was just with infantry units, etc., and in Afghanistan. Not only my years in the military, which is all SF, but being with soldiers and the time in Afghanistan with them, I just wanted to be faithful to the soldier, the GI in the ground. In fact, I'll give you a hint to it. The name of the book is Tattoo Zoo. And to show you the separation of me from the book, I hate tattoos. I would never get, I'm serious, I would never get a tattoo. One of the character, Doc Eberly, is like that in the book. Remember, they say, you won't get a tattoo, would you? Because you want to be a surgeon or something, and you can't have tattoos. It's something like that. And I hate tattoos. I would never get a tattoo. But I know the GI, that's who they are. That's what it was. So it's like, it's not, the book's not about me. It's about the American soldier.
Gotcha.
And that's why it's called Tattoo Zoo. That's the name of the platoon, and they're proud of the tattoos, even though
I think you're
Doc
right.
Eberly won't get it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's kind of the cultural mark that's come out of the conflict from the last 20 years. I know a lot of guys that served. My younger brother was a Marine and went in the Guard and went to Iraq. And yeah, he's covered in tattoos. So and a lot of the guys that he hangs out with and he rides bikes with and motorcycles and the club, and they're all veterans and they're all covered in tattoos. It's just sort of that mark that's kind of come out of that conflict, I guess.
And it's this modern age, and I remember at my age, I'm not of this generation. Mm-hmm. So by naming it Tattoo Zoo, even from the screenplay, I knew it wasn't about me. It's about someone else. So it made me really. It separates me from the real story, which is them.
Right. So the it's more of a collective look at how you saw life in the Army in Afghanistan and put all that into it.
Yeah, and it's the way my limited time at the high level as a command and stuff. I didn't hang around with 4 stars, yet I hope that I depict the 4-star command pretty accurately there. And it's going to get better and better now that if you're where the Chinook comes in, the best is yet to come, especially up there at the 4-star command. Oh man, when we go up to ISAF after dinner, it's fantastic stuff. And I hope I was honest with it, and I hope people will go, yeah, that's the way it is up there in the command, even though I didn't hang around with them. So.
Right. Well,
and the politics of all that, of course, which is that his political advisor, Gene Hutchinson, very important.
Yeah, so you mentioned there's a sequence in the book, early in the book, where Wolfe is talking about his background and his life growing up, and he's talking about all the books that his father has on the bookshelf, which I love.
I'm glad you noticed that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I love that, and there's some other you talk about Paths of Glory. What's your other influences? I mean, it's clearly to me there's an influence there from all that literature that came out of Vietnam. What else is influencing you?
Yeah, as I say, the pulling Matterhorn off the shelf, the big book, the Vietnam War, it influenced me in the sense that, yes, you can write a big novel still, like the novels I read earlier, A Thin Red Line, Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead, The Caine Mutiny. From World War II, we had these big novels, but of course, America doesn't read like it used to read. So it's like publishers don't want to publish anything over 100,000 words, especially from a nobody like me. They really don't want to publish it. And but Marlantes was an engineer and a financial guy, so his book Matterhorn, there's a coldness to it, and it really is a memoir. Even though it's not a memoir, it's a memoir. A novel is a memoir because he was a Marine Corps officer. He'd been a Rhodes graduate, an Oxford scholar, a Rhodes Scholar, Oxford, and he went in the Marine Corps. He was an officer, and that's what the story is. His Matterhorn is centered on a lieutenant, a Marine Corps lieutenant called Mellis. Mm-hmm. Marlantes, Mellis, but it's very memoir. So he writes more from an engineer's point of view. He's unable to get emotions and feelings, where I'm more of the feeling writer, the characters with feelings. So that, and of course the great ones that are mentioned that Wolfe mentions some books. I think he mentions Dispatches. Yeah. He mentions a great one, which I tell if anyone can find this, it's called "Slow Walk in a Sad Rain."
Right.
It's a small novel, and it came a Slow Walk in a Sad Rain by John P. McAfee. If one can find it, it's a Green Beret team on the border of Vietnam and like Laos, Cambodia, and it's a wild ride. It's just, and the writing is unique. It's the opposite of Tattoo Zoo. In all senses, the writing is unique and sharp and clipped, but it's short, and it jumps with these characters. So that's why Wolfe mentioned Slow Walk in a Sad Rain. I mean, it's a freak out. What are some other ones? He mentions The Killing Zone. He mentions the Chicken Hawk, of course. I don't know. Chicken Hawk is the Huey pilot. He mentions Philip Caputo, I'm sure, Rumor of War. Tim O'Brien, does he mention that? I don't know.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So those are things you take influence from.
Yeah, I guess the real influences would have been perhaps I'm trying to think if I read the big ones like The Naked and the Dead before or after Tattoo Zoo. That I'm not sure. Or Once an Eagle. Oh yeah, Once an Eagle's another one. Mm-hmm. That's a huge, big novel, and that doesn't cover just World War II or World War I or the Mexican War. It covers all three, all the way up to Vietnam.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I found interesting. You know, when I heard about the book and it's a book about Afghanistan and a nonfiction book, and I've read a lot of the nonfiction stuff that's been out about Afghanistan and Iraq, but I wasn't really aware of a lot of fiction that has come out to cover this conflict. And there's this long history of that, and I think your point you made of people don't read the way they used to read, that might be why. There's just not a whole lot of fiction that's come out of this conflict. So I was really excited to read it and kind of get a little bit of a different insight into things, I guess. But why do you think that's really it? Is it the reading style of people, or maybe is it that it's still too soon for some people to write about?
A couple of things. The reading style, most definitely, and men don't read as much as women in fiction. You know, fiction, the big market in fiction in America is women. And that's why, the women's, they read the novels and they have their women's book clubs. You know, they talk about the novels they read. So men aren't the readers like that. And if they are, I think they want the door-kicking seal stuff or, you know, the Delta going in, that kind of stuff. And Tattoo Zoo is supposed to be the Moby Dick sort of thing, the literary fiction, hopefully, that really shows the war, and that's the only book anyone would have to read about the Afghan war to know why we lost.
Right.
With the most powerful army in the world, the most powerful military in the world, and we're beat by goat herds.
How does that make you feel about seeing that? That was a question I certainly wanted to ask you. Was what was your thoughts about that whole debacle of pulling out like we did?
No, I didn't. The debacle, I'd known that it was inevitable. Trump should have left 3 years earlier, and he didn't. He said he was going to and didn't. No, because when I finished my Green Beret deployment over there, in fact, so this has been 2003. I wrote an essay, a short little thing for magazine publication that I hope that Newsweek or someone would do. The My Turn, Newsweek used to do a My Turn essay every week, which was individuals like me, nobody's like me. And I wrote one saying, wasting money in Afghanistan. So this is back in 2003. And the magazines I approached wouldn't even touch it, even though I was a Green Beret, just came back from war. You know, the number one, Iraq was the big war then, so no one cared. And then I was starting to publish in Soldier of Fortune magazine, and I met Bob Brown, the publisher of Soldier of Fortune. He had me come out and spend some time with him, and I said, I got this essay. And he looked at it and go, oh, my God, we're talking, just 900 words or something like that, 1,000 words. And he ran it in the Soldier of Fortune, and it's still available. So in 2003, I was saying we need to get out of here now.
Yeah.
End it now. We don't need to waste. And it's a short little essay in 2003. It's on my website with all the rest, called Wasting Money in Afghanistan, saying we need to get out. We've won. Let's leave. It's none of our business. We need to get out. And then 6 years later, I turned that into a huge essay called Flirting with Afghanistan, which is basically saying the same thing. We can't win here. It's just not us. It's not our culture. It's all these other reasons the Tattoo Zoo is showing. We can't win, but we kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And so I don't blame the GI at all. The GI is the Tattoo Zoo. They do what they have to do, and they do it as well as they can, all the way up to the pilots flying the Chinook. They're all doing a fantastic job for what they have to do, but it's beyond their level. It's at that political level where you can't fight a war. I think Rodriguez says it early on. It's a shitty war, but it's the only war we got.
Yeah.
Sniper Rodriguez says it. It's a shitty war, but it's the only war we got. So, and that's what a soldier wants. A soldier wants to go to war, doesn't he? Doesn't matter how shitty it is.
Yeah, he wants to put everything that he's learned into practice, right? So
that's right. And he wants the challenge, which is why Doc Eberly has come back in, because he says he was in Iraq, but then you go home and you're out of the Army or whatever, and you realize that maybe I wasn't as brave as I used to be. You always want to challenge that bravery. It's a soldier's part. He wants to challenge himself. So it's a shitty war, but it's the only one we got.
Right. I was like a lot of people, just kind of the same way of we should have gotten out sooner, but the fact that the way we left and the debacle that it was embarrassing. and I felt like it was an insult to the men who were there, and the men that lost their lives, all the people that lost their lives and everything. And I'm sure that came across your mind.
It's like one couldn't understand why they would give up Bagram Base. Remember, in the middle of the night, they gave up the big Bagram Base, and then, of course, the fiasco was all because it was then staged out of the Kabul airport, which they didn't have control over.
Yeah.
Oh, but just weeks earlier they were saying, oh, the 300,000 man Afghan National Army will do just fine. But they were lying to us.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating to see government in action, isn't it? Well, Paul, I appreciate the interview here. I don't want to spend all your time this afternoon. I thank you for having the conversation and giving us a little bit of look at your work, and I will put a link to your website in the description of the video. And
thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, people can find out more. They can see some of this. And I was a photographer, so I just filled the website with photographs of Afghanistan, and they can just get a delight out of those.
Yeah, I will certainly point people there. I know Pete from our the main website, Western Rough Shooters, has linked to you before, and he's the one that pointed me towards Bill to get in touch with you and do this interview.
Well, thank you. And let me know when you turn that last page. I'll be curious what your emotions are.
I will do so. I will send you an email with a synopsis of my thoughts on it. So I appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much. Oh, all right. Thanks again to Paul for doing that for me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can, drive some traffic to each other's sites. Anyway, that is all I have time for this week. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you all have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Spend time with your family and enjoy each other's company, family and friends. Anyway, like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership, and I will see you on the next episode.